truthfully, I had a little bit of a crisis. I got into Stanford and I got into UC Berkeley. Ultimately, I do believe that even now, it's like undergrad, you're just learning how to be responsible for yourself. Innovation, creativity, telling our stories, owning our stories. There's so much more that we can offer. Really, for just being who we are. A message about understanding where we come from is ultimately what's going to get us to where we're going.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Nesian News. Our mission is to connect and inspire our Islander community by sharing Islander success stories with everyone. So stay tuned for the full episode. What's up, everyone? On the show, I have Teyonna Jarman, and she's a super cool person. I reached out to her a couple months back, actually, through a cold LinkedIn message. And since then, she's just been super helpful in questions that I had. And we recently reconnected, and to have her on the show to really hear more about her story. I'm glad to have you on, Tiana.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dean, for having me. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. And I think the first thing I really want to do is just learn more about you as a person, what it was like for you growing up, where home was, and more about that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. I'm a military brat. My mom's from American Samoa, and joined the military right after high school. Likewise for my dad. My dad's Black African American from North Carolina. And so my parents met in Germany. They were both in the army. And so I was born in Germany. And lived there for about 8.5, 9 years. So my introduction to the US came around like 9 or 10. We kind of we moved around quite a bit. Like we left Germany, went back, but I think I was so young that I didn't really realize um like that I was moving around in different countries and cultures. Like that didn't really register for me until much later. So with that said, I think that I never really took for granted, or it was always just kind of baked into my upbringing to have multiple cultures around me. I never really questioned being in Germany, not really understanding German and like all the signs and stuff. Obviously, on the roads were like things that I couldn't read, but it never really occurred to me that like I didn't belong. And so I will say that uh, I have always attributed, like my parents and like that blended, um, culture in our household to like my preference for wanting to be around diverse people, and my comfort. Like I feel very, very comfortable around, other people, other cultures, other languages. Because even in my own household, that's kind of how I grew up. Like it was always very clear to me that like my dad did things one way, my mom did things one way, but it was never like one way was better or one way is weird and the other one's more normal. It's just kind of like, it's how we do it. So, yeah, I grew up all over. We moved around quite a bit. I ended up going to high school in Southern California. So whenever people ask me where I'm from, I claim Southern California. I went to high school up there. And when I graduated high school, I ended up going to Stanford University in Northern California. So I spent a lot of time in California. But at Stanford, I studied mechanical engineering, specifically product design, was my major. When I graduated from Stanford in 2018, I stayed in the Bay and I worked for a tech startup, a fintech startup. I was employee number 5. And I was there for 4 years. We grew that company. It's called Cherry Technologies, and we grew that company to about 150 people. By the time that I left, they're still doing really, really well, and I'm still in touch with everyone that I was working with there. Um, but uh, but I left just about a year ago, and started to kind of chase after some of my other passions. I've always been passionate about the arts, media, entertainment in college, even in high school. Like I sang, I took acting classes growing up, and I was in a couple different like plays and productions, and I did musicals when I was in college. So I've always kind of had an artistic and creative like leaning interests. But I chased after, tech for a little bit. So I've also always been a nerd. I've always been passionate about building things. So now I'm kind of searching for a good middle ground. The job that I left Cherry for was in media tech, and even now I'm still working in media and entertainment. Um, so trying to bridge that gap for me right now with media, entertainment, as well as tech, and building solutions. Which, like I said, when I was at Stanford, I studied product design, and I think it was a good middle ground. And so I'm searching right now for the career that's going to help me maintain that middle ground.
Yeah, that was amazing background. Thank you so much for we're gonna run through all of that because that was so much. And okay, okay. That's cool how you were born in Germany. I had another guy on the show, actually my last episode. His name was Ian Folau. He was also a military guy, and so he was born in Germany too. And one of the questions I asked him was, "How was that like growing up for you?" And you mentioned this as being surrounded by all these different cultures. Was there a moment where you looked back and you realized, "Oh, I'm Polynesian"?
Yeah. Um, It's funny because I do think that, my understanding of Polynesian people, of Samoan people, it's like we seek each other out and we find each other. And I'm sure that's true for most cultures. I think it's a beautiful thing. You have something that reminds you of home, you have something that keeps you grounded, but you also have that shared experience where you can build community around. So even in Germany, so my mom, all of her siblings joined the military. Just about yeah, three out of four of her siblings joined the military. And so when we were in Germany, my mom's sister was stationed there, so I got to see my cousins in Germany. My mom also had an aunt, and her husband was stationed in Germany. So I actually had quite a bit of family um, when I was coming up, and like I remember us being a part of, they would have these like, um, what is the Asian Pacific Islander, like the Pacific Heritage Month celebrations. And like I grew up dancing, and we would be a part of those performances. So I think I always did have a good sense of that culture, putting a name to it and being able to tell people about, like, my mom's always been very, very proud American Samoan, right? And uh, like my grandmother, whenever she would call, my mom tried to teach me Samoan as a language. My mom spoke Samoan around the house, so I did always kind of have an understanding of that as my identity. But just finding my place in that, obviously, growing up was trickier. But yeah, I think looking back at my time in Germany, I think that's why I didn't realize I was like in another country for a while, because I did have family around. The school that I went to, like, because I was military, it was a Department of Defense school, so all my teachers and stuff spoke English. And um, like I didn't really process like, oh, I'm not from here in that sense, right? But yeah, I think like growing up, um, being someone was definitely always like core to who like we ate rice for every meal. Like like we would get the boxes, the care packages from someone. So like I knew what Bisuka was, and like I knew what chop suey was. Like I knew what these things were. And I, like I said, I think um, maybe I did kind of take it for granted a little bit because I just didn't know any other way to be. It wasn't until I got to the United States where I realized, like, oh, like I was living somewhere completely different from here, and like, okay, now this makes more sense. But yeah, in Germany, I think as a kid, you just kind of you do what you're told. And that's what I did.
No, that's awesome. And I think growing up for you, because you kind of have this unique perspective as a mixed person, because you're half black and half Samoan. And so I love to learn more about how that's like for you, how your experience is sort of different than me, for example, who's full Polynesian, or someone else who's fully black. And so, well, what's it like for you coming from that mixed background?
Yeah, I've had conversations with a lot of other people, mixed, and then also mixed with black. on how that shapes just our perspective and our quest to define our identities, right? Like I said, I think my parents did a really, really good job of celebrating both cultures in my household. So at home, I never felt the need to be more one way than the other. Um, but I do think again, as I got older and I started to kind of pick up on some of these nuances and realize that there were distinctions and really like contemplate what those distinctions were. I think that's where I started to kind of notice more just how the world perceives me, right? I think a lot of times I find even now, depending on where I go, I travel a lot, and depending on where I go, whether it's in the United States or overseas, a lot of people don't know what Polynesian is, or I get the like, "Oh, so you're Hawaiian," a lot, right?
Yeah.
I think Hawaii, for better or for worse, they've had the visibility for the longest of like what it means to be a Pacific Islander. And as a kid, I even thought that that was like cool to just let that be people's perception, like, "Oh yeah, so it's like Hawaiian." It wasn't until later, and even now that I do a better job of trying to make sure that we honor the distinctions, that we honor, all the different cultures that are a part of the Pacific, and even like dedicating myself to learning more about not just Polynesia, but Micronesia, as well as Melanesia, really getting rid of those terms in general because we didn't make them up as a Pacific Islander people, right? Like, there's all these things that like we're all learning, I think over time, but yeah, I think that once I got older, I realized Black was more apparent for some people, depending on spaces I was in. It was like way more apparent. Like, okay, she's Black. She's also something else, but she like we know she's Black. Uh, and so I think that there's always been so much more education that's necessary and so much more as far as like what I can advocate for my Polynesian side. Like just way more work that's done and I accept it and kind of revel in it sometimes. As much as I'm sure you can relate to, sometimes when you're the only one, you kind of feel that pressure to like, I have to be the spokesperson for this beautiful, dynamic
Yeah.
culture that, like, I ultimately didn't really grow up in, not fully, right? But at the same time, I think it's a beautiful thing that even as a kid, I always kind of embraced. It's what made me different. At school when we would have, like, culture day or, like, bringing something from home for show and tell, I did always like to bring stuff and explain to my classmates what a pulkasi was or explain to them, like, the things that, like we did as traditions in my household that I knew no one else really did, explain to them, the art of dancing and what these different dances mean. My mom was always listening to Samoan music around the house. And so even like being able to bring that to school to show my friends or to be able to invite other people, once I got into college and I had friends that would come and like visit my home for the holidays. And I just kind of get to showcase what made us unique in that way. I've always really, really embraced it. But that is something that I feel, at times is hard to balance, which I'm sure any mixed person, would be able to tell you. Like I, remember very, like, vividly, a couple years ago, with the Black Lives Matter protests and, the George Floyd, um, y the protests that were around, what happened with George Floyd. Um right at the peak of the pandemic. I think a lot of those were happening at the same time as Asian Pacific Heritage Month. And I remember posting something on social media because around Asian Pacific Heritage Month, I've always, tried to be pretty vocal about, uh, you know, um, I guess educating people. I think around that same time is like Samoan Language Week. And so I've always been like really vocal and sharing um, a lot of those resources that kind of surface online. But during that time, I remember putting in my post, like, my Black identity feels way more urgent to showcase, to protect, and to speak on. So there's definitely times I think where I feel like you kind of have to prioritize one over the other, but like I said, I think I grew up in a very embracing household. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job of embracing
Yeah,
both, trying to
that's
be
awesome.
both at all times.
That's really cool because you have to balance these identities, and I think it gives you such a unique way of seeing the world as you're coming first of all, born in Germany and coming over from Germany to America in high school, and then now you're thinking, "Okay, everyone's asking you, 'What do you wanna do with your life?'" And you have to figure out where you wanna go out of high school. Like, I think from the time you're 12 years old, everyone's asking you, so you already have to have something in mind. How did you end up at Stanford?
Yeah. Oh, what a crazy I whenever I think back to my time, 'cause I'm a very spiritual person as well. I'm a person of faith. I ended up at Stanford because I was meant to be there. For everything, I have so many stories about Stanford and all the things that I would definitely do different. But um, fun fact is I didn't even apply for Stanford on time. Um, I remember the Common App crashed, so I was one of those people that, like, waited and, I was editing my essays over and over and over, and I didn't even wait until really the last minute, but the day that everything was due, I remember trying to submit, like, probably midday. I think, everything is due at midnight, and it was around, like, 6 o'clock. I didn't even eat dinner. I was so stressed, because I was trying to submit my application and it kept crashing and, uh, like all my everything was just going wrong. It's like my, recommendations would disappear and then my essay would disappear. And so I was just like frantically trying to figure out what was going on. It's because everybody was submitting their applications during that time. So the whole site crashed. I remember like crying to my mom. I was like, well, now I'll never know. Like I couldn't apply. I remember getting on Facebook and all these Facebook groups. I think someone literally started a Facebook group. It was like everyone who couldn't apply to Stanford on time. And it was like all these people. And like it did make me feel better. It's like we all had this shared experience, thousands of people. It's like, yeah, we couldn't get our application in on time. Um, and I remember feeling so dejected and so like, well, now I'll never know. I'll never know if I would ever get in. And then like I think it was 2 days later, Stanford sent out an official message saying that they understand a lot of people couldn't get their applications in time. So they opened the application again for an extra like 48 hours for anyone who needed and like oh my gosh. When I'd say, like, relieved, I think I cried all over again. Like, "Yes, I get to do it." Um, I got in. So, when I think back on that, I'm like, I was definitely meant to go to that school. 'Cause I didn't even I probably could have applied 3 days earlier than when I did, but I was just so, like, I gotta read my application again. I gotta edit my essay again. Um, but yeah, I think as far as like what I did leading up to that moment, I was just super, super involved in just about everything. I had a nickname, which reflecting on it now, an unfortunate nickname, but everyone used to call me dictator in high school. Um, as far as like leadership and everything, that came very naturally to me, but I really did lead a lot. I was president of a lot of different clubs. I was just super, super passionate about school and not just the academics, but like the community of school. I think I had a very intimate understanding of this idea that like we were spending more time at school than we were at home. And so I was really passionate about just making school someplace one that I was excited to be at because I would have to be there most of my day, but also like to really listen to the students around me, people that had different perspectives than I did. Like not everybody gets excited for math class. I was the type of person that got excited for math class, but for the students that didn't get
Me and
excited
you,
for math class,
the 2 students in the back who were raising our hands for the questions.
exactly. I got excited for just about every class, but understanding there's a lot of people who don't necessarily get excited for class. So what can we get them excited about? So I was a part of student government. I was, the person that was throwing on all these special events, carnivals and dances and pep rallies and I was a part of starting a whole club that was all about helping new students because I was a part of a military community. So it was very common. And I mean, I was one of them, students that would leave and move somewhere else, go somewhere new. I was really passionate about just making that transition a lot easier. Um, both of my parents were in the military, not just one. So being able to foster a community that could support that, I was just really, really passionate about supporting the students that, like I knew it like 2 times, like tenfold, for me. Like, I get it, your parents are at home, like, just creating that community. So, I think that's probably, when you think about all the things that you put together for like a college application, I know that definitely shone through in a lot of my college applications. Like this girl just did a lot. I was on the like school board. I was one of the student representatives. I would go to school board meetings. I had more meetings than I did classes, and I think that's how you knew like I was going to school with a very different mindset. Like I'm like I got to meet with the principal today. I got to meet with this faculty member today. I got a school board meeting after school today. I have volleyball practice, and then I had to go tutor the football team. And that was like a very normal day for me. It's like I definitely had a very full calendar.
Yeah, man, no
So
wonder, no wonder you ended up. And then does that kind of relate to your story of getting into college? Because I was very slow. I only applied to 4, and
yeah.
all the 3 others I did not get into. And so the 4th one, I was waiting to hear back, super stressed out, and then I finally get the email, and like confetti goes up in the email, and I'm so relieved. I can finally relax. And then senioritis hits hard, of course, but but it's so true. But then you come out here to college, and it's so different than what you originally thought it would be, and that's how it was for me. How was it like for you at Stanford?
Mm. Yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying about admission. We can have a totally different conversation about admissions, but I wholeheartedly believe that the admissions process is kind of it felt so random for me, um, because I applied. I think just like you, I applied to about 5 schools. I think 5 or 6 schools, um, and I got waitlisted for all of the out of state schools. I got into Stanford and I got into UC Berkeley. And I remember just kinda looking at that, like, I got waitlisted at Princeton, I got waitlisted at U Chicago, um, and up until that point, I had mentors and I had some teachers that, um, kinda gave me a heads up or where they thought, everyone thought I was a shoe-in for U Chicago. They're like, "Stanford might be a little bit of stretch. U Chicago, you're in there." And then when I got waitlisted there but got into Stanford, I think I learned a very, very important lesson even then about just, like, you end up where you're meant to be. Because the admissions process, I'm like, I realize nobody knows. Nobody understands the admissions process. Um,
That's so funny because I was also waitlisted for Chicago.
right. And so it's like, okay. And I remember even then I told myself, like, okay, sounds like I'm meant to stay in California because that's the only schools I got into. Um, but yeah, man, I think because I had this approach to high school. Truthfully, high school from like the actual academic rigor, in high school clearly wasn't enough to keep me busy because I stayed busy with a bunch of other stuff. But that like got totally flipped on its head at Stanford. At Stanford, I'm studying all night long, all week long, and all the way up until we take the test. And I go and I sit down at the at the exam, and I'm like, I have no idea how to answer.
I know exactly what you mean. Oh my goodness.
And so, yeah, it was very different from, like, in high school, I could, like, finish an assignment while I'm still in class, and then just be free the rest of the day to just do whatever I want to. College, very different. I think another thing that, people don't really prepare you for, um, and as much as people told me my freshman year, I never really understood it. But in college, you're also just learning how to live on your own. Like, there's so much about, like, um, maintaining your own schedule, like, you don't have someone my mom was very hands-on, when she was my parents, as much as they did work, it was like, they kind of set up that structure for me and my sisters, like, we had a routine. No one tells you that in college, you're kind of trying to figure out what that routine's going to be, and you're doing it all on your own, like, figure out what day are you doing laundry? Because I'm used to doing laundry on Sunday, but I'm like,
Mhm.
everybody does laundry on Sunday. I got to figure out how to put my schedule together so I can make sure I'm doing laundry every Wednesday. Like, and it seems so easy, but it's really not. It's really, really not. On top of that, like homesickness is a huge thing. At least for me, I have 4 sisters. So, like kind of not having that family unit and not, being able to see my family as often was tough. Um, yeah, I think I realized I just kind of had to start from the basics again. I had to learn how to study. That was something I thought I was really good at that. When I got to Stanford, I was like, no, wait, the studying you were doing in high school is not the studying you need to do here. Um, and again, like just really, really finding that community. I think when I got to Stanford, I was too busy trying to, in the beginning at least, I was too busy trying to maintain. I think the kind of um, like, persona that I had in high school. It was like, she's got it all together, and, like, people looked up to me in high school, and so, I really struggled with just asking for help, or letting it be known, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Um, and being able to just, like, kinda start fresh in college and be like, like, find your study groups and figure out, what is it that you do need um to stay motivated. When I got to college my freshman year, I didn't really involve myself in too many extracurriculars, thinking that like, okay, I'm going to focus on school. I think I found a better balance after freshman year. I got back into singing, and I was a part of an a cappella group. I started to do musicals, and you kind of pick up the things that um, motivate you outside of schoolwork, and you're going to need it because the schoolwork definitely is a lot. Um, but again, I think when I look back and I had to come to peace with my college experience, because I look back and I'm like, I did high school right. In college, I'm like, we stumbled a little bit for sure. But to have the grace of, I got to a really prestigious institution. And truthfully, there was no playbook, there was no example. And anyone that I didn't know anyone that went to Stanford, and I don't know if that's true for you with Northwestern, but I'm like, I don't have an example. I didn't even really have anyone to ask, and I think that's another, layer to, like, multicultural families and maybe even Pacific Islanders as we are, kind of entering into being first generation or being second generation, like, we don't have a lot of history, one, in this country to begin with, but then two, to have the history where, we have generations who have done higher education. So, like, for me on both sides of my family, like, I was first generation. I didn't have anyone, first and foremost, that could kind of help me navigate what college life was going to look like. But then also knowing, I'm one of the oldest grandkids on my mom's side. So, all of my other cousins, as they're like looking to me and I'm the first one that they're seeing, like go to college, uh, I recognized that pressure that I felt a lot from my little sisters, from my cousins, like a lot of people who kind of had this, again, this image of me with like, yeah, she did high school. She was on top being in college and realizing like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing here. But like I'm also trying to make sure that everything that I'm learning I can pass down. There's a lot of um I think there's a lot of pressure with that in any culture, but a lot of pressure that people can feel kind of weighing on their shoulders in that way where it's like, not only do I have to figure out how to do this, I gotta do it right because I gotta be able to pass it down and hopefully continue to make room for more people like me. And for me, that was definitely, as immediate as my family, but for platforms like this, where hopefully we can reach other people that share our backgrounds. Because these are spaces that we belong in. These are spaces that we ultimately bring so much value to. But again, it takes it takes people doing it first and figuring it out so that they can kind of pass down the wisdom along the line.
Yeah, I actually resonate with that so much because, like what you were saying, I came out here originally so happy, so excited, and there was not a single other Polynesian out there. And it hit me hard, and I was, like, super lonely, and it was one of the biggest reasons why I decided to go out there and make Nesian news and connect our people, and so, yeah, I just really connect with what you were saying, and another thing that I wanted to explore more is how do you choose a career? Like, I'm at Northwestern trying to figure out what I'm gonna do with my life. When you were at Stanford, how was that looking around? All the other students seem like they have their whole career lives figured out, and then you have to decide what you wanna do and then go and do it.
Yeah. I resonate so deeply with stories, is what I had to really realize about myself. Um, a lot of the stories that I collecting as a kid were from media. I watched a lot of TV. I read a lot of books. Played quite a few video games, right? And so there were so many things that I didn't realize until I reflected on it as I got older. Like I'm taking from what I'm seeing in media for like what these experiences are supposed to be. College was no different. Like I said, I didn't have anyone I could personally speak to about college. So I was looking at movies and television and books and the things that I had read, like, oh, right, this is how this experience goes. This is what I can expect. This is how you navigate it. Um, it's a very silly example, but the first thing that popped in my mind was like, I don't know if you've ever seen an extremely goofy movie, and it's the one when Max goes to college. And, like, it's stuff like that that I'm like, that was my understanding of what college was. Yeah, you study, you live in a dorm, like and so, navigating those things, I think, again, um, without having, like, real life stories to help guide you, I was making so many assumptions. And one of the biggest assumptions that I kept making was that whatever I was studying in my undergrad was absolutely going to lead to my career. Right. And it wasn't until my senior year, truthfully, um, because again, I was just trying to figure out how to keep my head above water. I think for 2 years, then junior year, I started finally like, okay, I think I kind of got this. But that's also where, all of your kind of general like education requirements, you get those out of the way. Now you're like really leaning into your major. And truthfully, I had a little bit of a crisis because I'm like, I don't want to be an engineer. I didn't realize that until now I'm 2 years into, the practicality is I've been paying to go to school now for 2 years. And I kind of felt pressured, to just keep going because I'm like, I can't afford to change majors and even that, like, I think the perception that I had on what it means to change your major came from movies. In movies, they make it seem like it's a terrible thing if you switch majors or you don't know what you're studying. Um, and so, yeah, I just kind of kept with it. And it wasn't until senior year at that point I was really freaking out because I'm like, okay, I studied engineering this whole time. And now I don't want to be an engineer, but I don't have any like background or any experience doing anything else. And I remember an alumni from Stanford. I was talking to them and they were like, well, first of all, this assumption that you have of using your major to directly correlate to what you're going to do at like, they're like, where'd that come from? Like it wasn't until then that I really started to break down like a lot of these assumptions that I was making about college. Um, and so uh, I'm still learning, right? As I said, I've kind of pivoted some more. Uh, but at the time, I think it was really, really important for me to finally hear uh, from other people from the perspective. A lot of people where they were like, "Yeah, your undergrad, like study what you want to study, study the thing," and like because ultimately, I do believe that even now, it's like undergrad, you're just learning how to be responsible for yourself. And so sometimes the hack is, yeah, go study things that are um, interesting enough to you where you know you're going to get out of bed to go to these classes. Because Lord knows if I had a class that attendance was not a part of the grade, I'm like, "Okay, somebody just pass me the notes because 'cause I'm not going to class tomorrow." Um, like, find something that's gonna get you out of bed, it's like, have you excited to go to that class. Find something that, you're passionate about, that you really nerd out about. Um, and enjoy it, right? Like, enjoy, and by enjoy it, it's like, find other people, whether it's faculty. That was one thing, like I said, about doing things differently. One thing I would do different at Stanford is, like, really take the time to get to know my faculty, especially at, a place like Stanford, Northwestern. Like, I took for granted how much, like, knowledge was sitting right there, just in my professors. You get used to that professor being that person that's like, "Oh, they gave me a bad grade," and, like, or they're, like, lecturing me, and, like, I didn't really have this mindset of, like, really getting to know them, and learning from all of their rich experience. It's not the easiest thing in the world to be a college professor, to be qualified to be a college professor. So those are, like, really, really great, um, just pools of knowledge that you can drink from, for sure. And when it's time, first off, I would also spend more time just looking at what are even the options for jobs. Because I think even right now, I'm kind of in that space. If you're interested in a certain industry, or if you, like, go to all the college fairs, the job fairs, I mean, um, and even just sit and kind of listen. And if somebody has a job that somewhat interests you, or you're like, I would want to know more about, like, what you did to get there, or what you do, what's the, day-to-day like for someone in that position? And just learn more about what the options even are. Because once I got out of college, I didn't even realize there's still job, like, roles and descriptions that I hear now. I'm like, I didn't know people get paid to do that. Like, I didn't know that that was even an option. And, you learn more about, the pathways, and how did you get there, and what kind of skills do you need? Um, I think that's the biggest thing that I'm still learning, is, like, how do you speak to skills, right? Not even necessarily just, like, um, specific, like, experiences mapping, job title to job title. Like, "Oh, I have to have this job title in order to get here." That's not necessarily true. It's more about, like, the skill sets that you possess, and making sure that there's visibility of you, possessing those skills. If you're a graphic designer, you should absolutely be keeping everything, in your portfolio, um, that you're doing, that you're working on. And I think, again, just for whatever it is that you want to get into, make sure that you maintain that portfolio, because that's really what a portfolio is. It's just showing off the skill sets that you have. Um, so yeah, I guess, and, like, that was my really, really long way of saying finding a job can look like so many different things. There's so many things that you have to, kind of keep into account. But, um, yeah, it's not linear, at all. And I think it just requires, um, one, for you to, like, take your time, really, really take your time, and be thoughtful and intentional about how you're spending your time. Like, spend your time, again, like, honing in on crafts and skills, and really get to know what you like. I think for me as a person right now, I'm really bad at answering what I like, but I think it's okay if you start off with answering what you don't like. And that's kind of where I started. Um, like, I'm really good at that. And I'm really good at defining, like, yeah, I know I don't want to do that. I know I don't want to do that. But sometimes I think you can kind of speed through that a little bit if you just start in college. Start
Yeah.
figuring out what you like, what you don't like, sooner rather than later. And I think that helps you kind of weed out, what some of those paths you want to take. But, um, yeah, I think I, again, came from movies and stuff, but I thought I had to have it all figured out by 24. Like, I graduated from college and I got to have a career path. And I think most people will tell you, like, started over here, now I'm way over here. I'm certainly a great example of that. Started in tech.
Yeah, I wanna get more into that. It's like, cause you started off in tech and then now you shifted over to media. How was that like for you? How'd you even get involved in this fintech world and then making the shift?
Yeah. if I could take you back, like, play by play, I think it would take us, like, 5 days because it has been a lot. But, when I was at Stanford, I did take a lot of, communication courses. Had I, again, keyed into that, I think, a little bit sooner, I had nights where I thought, "Maybe I should change my major." Because like I said, that was the difference. I hated getting up and going to physics class, but didn't miss a single communications class, right? Like, I those were the classes that, like, and I didn't realize it until later. I didn't realize, like, "Oh, wait, this is cool. Like, I like this." And I'm I found myself being back in that space where I'm going above and beyond, and because I wanted to, not because, "Oh, I need this for my grade," but it was like, "No, I actually want to sit here and read through this and write a little bit more," and, so that should have been a key thing for me, like, "You should maybe go over here." Um, so I knew I already had kind of that interest, but I just didn't really follow it. Even, you know, more truthfully, I think in my mind, engineering and everything, that was gonna solidify me a better job. So I kind of chased that practicality for a while, which is cool. For some people, it works. For me, I think I found years in, like, okay, we got to change something. So when I graduated from Stanford, honestly, um, a lot of it I feel like was happy accidents. It was a lot of being in the right place at the right time. With the Bay Area and like Silicon Valley, startup culture, that is startup culture. It's where all the, like, major startups, happen. Everybody that's in Silicon Valley that has a startup has those, like, Bill Gates, Microsoft, Google dreams, of having something grand, and so, it's very easy to kinda get swept up in that. But when I graduated, I was really just looking for a job. I was looking for a job. I knew I didn't want to, be an engineer, so I was on the job boards. I was, looking at, like, different career fairs, and I just happened, again, to find a job that suited my skill set. I came into Cherry Technologies. It was a different company at the time, but, I came into that company, as the executive assistant to the CEO. Um and it really was just I need a job, and I'm trying to just, like, figure out what it is I wanna do. But I think having that willingness to learn will get you in so many more doors, than trying to come in and know everything right off the bat. So I just learned. Um, and with that company, uh, I came in, it was called Mason Finance. We were acquired, and then we pivoted, and I was there, again, employee number 5. I was there the day that we picked the name, Cherry, um, and we just kind of ran with it, and I learned so much. I learned so much, and was willing to keep learning. But like I said, I think after about 4 years, it was just realizing, I was kind of in that space again, I think the same cycle as college. College is also 4 years, high school is 4 years, like, maybe I'm just that 4-year cycle person. But I think after 4 years, I just kind of had a really deep moment of reflection, like, "Okay, we've learned what we need to learn. It might be time now to step into a new phase." And while I was at Cherry, and once I kind of got my bearings, got my feet under me, I started to get comfortable with what I was doing. I started getting back into hobbies. And that's one thing after college, people tell you will disappear quickly if you don't feed them actively, is your hobbies. Like, I became someone who's like, my work was my life. If I wasn't working, I was probably sleeping 'cause I was so tired from always working. Um, and so once my hobby started to come back in again, I think that's what kind of reawakened this realization for me of like, oh, right, these are the things that I like. I like going to shows, and I like live shows, whether it was a musical or a play or a concert. Like, these are the things that I like. Entertainment. I started getting back into writing, and looking at, different types of writing for television. I started to pick up, just like other opportunities and things that were in the media space, that, again, like, I started to feel like work was becoming work, and then the fun was happening afterward. I think, as much as I feel like it's a new concept, everybody's like, "Oh, your generation, you guys are always just trying to have fun." Um, but I do think it's important. I do think um, it ultimately, again, is what fuels you, and I think some of your best work comes from spaces where you feel empowered to just try things. You feel that curiosity, and I think that's where innovation happens, that's where creativity happens. And truthfully, I think I say this all the time about like Pacific Islander communities. The way that I think about it is a lot of those skills and a lot of those values haven't necessarily been fostered. Um, because there's really not a lot of space for creativity on an island. You like, um, the people who, like, figured out how to weave baskets and, like, that was creativity, but ultimately, it's all about practicality, right? Like, I talk with my mom a lot about this as far as, like, culturally, like, um learning fails, chores, like the utility of what it takes to survive. Um, like that perspective changes once you leave the island and you come into the States. And I think it's most, I think, older Pacific Islander people can relate to this. So I had this conversation with like my uncles and just more people from my mom's side of the family where, yeah, like you don't really, they never really came into contact with these values and ideas of like, I just want to live a fulfilling life and be happy. Like these things that they're just like, no, you go get a job, you pay the
Go
bill.
eat. Go eat,
Right.
make your stomach full, don't have
Right.
kids, and do
Like,
it again. Yeah.
like, what are you talking about? Why are you, all these like other emotions that we're feeling? I feel unfulfilled. Like, what are you talking about? You hungry? Like, that's like, what? Go eat. So, I do think that as like we take up more space in Western society in the United States, that's a really, really big part of what I feel like we're missing as a community. But you see more and more of that now because again, we are taking up more and more of those spaces. More and more of us are being creative and ultimately like we have to own telling our stories. And so even something like this, I'm sure if you go far enough like back down in your lineage, like you have ancestors that would look at you like, "You're trying to do what?" Like, you're talking to people? Like, when I think that's like we learn the value of these things and how it not only preserves our culture, but ultimately, like, pushes us forward. Because again, innovation, creativity, telling our stories, owning our stories, it's been so great to see more and more Pacific Islander actors and film directors, to see more and more Pacific Islanders in tech, and creating solutions and building. And I think that's where, in all of my like roundabout journey, ultimately where I have come to is again trying to find that middle ground within like entertainment, media, but also tech. Because again, I think the innovation that technology can bring, um, like we're the only ones I think that we can trust to have um, the ethics and the integrity of using these tools to our benefit. Um, the more that we as a community are coming to terms with cultural crisis. We have a language crisis across the Pacific Islands. Not too many people are really learning our languages anymore. We have an oral history, so if we lose a language, we lose history. Not too many Pacific Islands have a written history. Um, I think like as we come into contact with more and more of these things that we're realizing, trying to preserve our culture, it's important that we, first and foremost, because we're the ones that feel the urgency, but also, again, we're the ones that have the integrity to know, like, we're going to preserve the culture for us. You see all of the things happening in Hawaii with trying to get land back, and trying to preserve again indigenous culture, and making sure that the indigenous people of these islands, remain in the center of of what, we want the world to see about these islands. I think it's important. It's important to do both. I know, again, as a person who is very intimately familiar with how media has shaped my perception, my thoughts. I don't sleep on for 2 seconds what the movie Moana did for all Pacific Islanders. Like,
Wow.
because it ultimately it educated people. It gave people, something that not only can they relate to, you build the empathy for our cultures, but like again, you also have that representation of the beauty of who we are. Um, but I think all of those things combine and come together. And we have to have ownership. I think that's what all cultures are realizing now. Representation, as much as we've been saying representation matters, representation absolutely matters. The next step after representation is ownership. And I think that's truly the journey that I'm kind of on, right? It's
Yeah.
figuring out now how do we get from representation to that ownership, and to invite more of us into those spaces.
That is powerful stuff, seriously. And thank you so much for walking through your journey, so many twists and turns.
Yeah.
Now looking back, what's left? Where are you gonna go from here?
Mm. Um. Well, as I continue to search, I think for like that like aha moment, the light bulb job. I think it's always important to just leave everything that you touch better than how you left it. Mm. And so right now, I'm very involved in live music. Mm. And again, it's just seeing where my people are in these spaces. I do a lot of traveling with different artists, um, live shows, live concerts, and it's always great when I look up and I see most of the security, specific Islanders. Um, and again, just like sharing those stories, getting to know one another, but ultimately um, yeah, like being unapologetic about that space that we take up, and being proud of where we've come. Specifically, I work with a lot of like hip hop artists and the Samoans, the Tongans, the Fijians that have been in those spaces back in the 80s and 90s, and the legacy that we have as protectors of as the security. um, and I was just having a conversation with the head of security for CeeLo Green, and he was talking about all of these different plans that they have to kind of build up their security branch, and they're putting on a festival. And um, I stay involved as much as I can be with like the reggae, island reggae scene as well. And just kind of figuring out, again, along my journey, I know I'm not going to stay in this space, but being here, being on the ground, um, seeing people, getting to network with people, and figuring out, okay, so that's where we are. Um, these are the needs of everyone in this community. So when I do get to where I'm wanting to go, I know who I'm reaching back out to. I know, where my people are, and what our needs are. So I think for me right now, again, I'm really looking to marry my interest in media, entertainment, whether it's music, whether it's film, um, TV. I have so many different kind of interests, as well as friends and projects that I'm working on across those industries. But then again, also looking at technology and figuring out how can we leverage it. I have a bunch of friends that are trying to address the language crisis. How can we leverage technology to teach the Pacific Islander languages as we continue to spread out across the United States? How can we bring one another together? You with Nesian News is solidifying that, right? Like, how can we build a solution, and what does solution space look like to bring us all together, to keep us informed on what other people are working on, and to ultimately like be able to leverage all of these other skills and all of these other experiences that we're all getting now that we're spread out and we're moving across. What I think I had a friend that coined the term the concrete ocean. You look at the diaspora of Pacific Islanders that are spread out across the United States, the concrete ocean. Like, how do we continue to tap in with one another and support one another? I think that's ultimately where I would like to get to. I think it was great to be, a part of Blavity, um, the Black media tech company, kind of seeing how they've structured, exactly that as a hub, um, for the Black community, and looking at, now my other side, my Samoan side and my Pacific Islander side. How can we do that and strengthen one another and empower one another? Um, Certainly, I think what will ultimately always be my biggest goal in life, and um, my most core value. But there's so many different ways, and I think I'm still in a phase of just learning, um, all the different avenues that we'll be able to attack. So I take it day by day. Take,
Yeah.
all the projects and stuff. Some things haven't changed since high school, and I'm still working on a lot of different things, um, right now. But again, I think ownership, I do have my own company, that I freelance from right now, um, and really embracing, not just the representation, but the ownership of what we're, representing too, is a big part of this phase of life that I'm in right now.
Man, I cannot wait to see where life will take you, and we'll definitely have you on the show in the future.
Yeah.
Future projects come on, and it's so exciting to see other Polynesians going out and doing big things. That's really cool. And the final question I want to leave off with is, if you could put up a sign, and this sign goes on every single door of every single Polynesian islander out there in the world, and they would see this sign every day, whether they're walking in, walking out of their home, what would that sign say?
Mm. I had 2 slightly different answers for this when I was thinking about it. So now I was hoping that one would come out as the leader when you asked it. Um, yeah, I do think it has to be twofold. I would want whatever it said to have a message about understanding where we come from, is ultimately what's going to get us to where we're going. Um, I think as a people, this idea of like you're your ancestors' wildest dreams, mm, like that always comes forward to me as a saying, that I hold deeply, to my heart, because I think it's important that, we are constantly tied to where we came from. Our ancestors, I think that's where tradition comes from. That's ultimately where culture comes from, and who we are as people. Our bloodlines, they run thick and they run deep. And it's important for us to be connected to that. But as a people, it's also important that, we don't get left behind. Um, that there's so much more that we can offer, really for just being who we are. But at the same time, understanding that there's always room for us to grow and evolve as people. And I think there's a very like necessary balance in that. So I didn't quite figure out how I would want to say it, but the message that needs to be on the door has to do something with, um, understanding where you're coming from, so that we ultimately can get to where we're going. Because I don't think where we're going, will be possible if we lose our traditions, our ancestry. If we lose where we came from, I don't think where we're going really even matters.
Completely agreed. Tiana, thank you so much for your time and sharing your story. I'm super excited to see the impact that it has on other people. And if anyone's listening to this podcast, how could they get in touch with you or reach out?
Yeah. You can find me on, I think most things, my full name, Teyonna Michelle Jarman. It's on, LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. My Instagram's also Tiana Michelle. My Twitter's Tiana Michelle. Dean will tell you, you send me a cold message, 9 times out of 10, I'm definitely
It's
going.
true.
So, I love connecting with people. So yeah, please feel free, and always let me know I can support. And that goes for you, especially Dean, like anything that I can do to continue to support.
I
What
appreciate that.
on, just let me know. I'm always down.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm excited to see how things go. Seriously. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Mm, Let me okay. Hey, you made it. Thanks for listening to this Islander success story. If you want more of these, head over to Nesian.news. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you an email every single time we put an Islander success story out there. And remember, our mission is to connect and inspire Islanders around the world.